I'm standing in the same conference room where they fired me 2 years ago. Same mahogany table, same leather chairs, same view of downtown Chicago through floor-to-ceiling windows. But this time, I'm not the one being escorted out by security. This time, I own the building. Welcome back, Sarah, I say to my former boss, watching her face drain of color as she realizes who's sitting across from her. The merger documents are spread between us like a peace treaty she's about to sign. I believe you said I'd never work in marketing again. Her hands shake as she reaches for her coffee. 2 years ago, she called me into this exact room and told me I was too honest for corporate culture, that my inability to play politics made me unemployable, that I should consider a career change. She was right about one thing: I did change careers. I became her boss. The irony isn't lost on me that the woman who destroyed my life with lies is now sitting across from me, forced to smile and pretend she's happy about this acquisition. But here's what she doesn't know yet: I didn't just buy her company to prove a point. I bought it because I discovered the real reason she fired me. And today, in about 30 minutes, she's going to learn that some secrets have a way of surfacing when you least expect them. Comment below, have you ever had a boss you'd love to get revenge on? What happened? 2 years ago, I was Sarah Chen, Senior Marketing Manager at Pinnacle Digital Solutions. 31 years old, MBA from Northwestern, 6 years of climbing the corporate ladder, one strategic campaign at a time. I lived in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, surviving on takeout and caffeine, telling myself the 60-hour weeks were worth it because I was building something. What I was really building was someone else's empire while barely scraping together rent money. But I loved what I did. Marketing wasn't just my job, it was my art form. I could look at a product, understand its soul, and craft a story that made people fall in love with it. My campaigns consistently outperformed projections. The Meridian Hotel's account I landed single-handedly brought in $3 million in revenue. The tech startup rebrand I orchestrated resulted in a successful IPO. I was good, really good, and everyone knew it. Especially my boss, Victoria Sterling. Victoria was everything I thought I wanted to be. 45, commanding, always perfectly put together in designer suits that cost more than my monthly salary. She'd built Pinnacle from a small agency into a powerhouse with Fortune 500 clients. Women in business magazines called her a disruptor and a visionary. What they didn't call her was honest. I should have seen the signs earlier. The way she took credit for my ideas in client meetings. How she'd assign me impossible deadlines, then swoop in to save the day with solutions I'd already proposed. The subtle undermining disguised as mentorship. Sarah, you're brilliant, but you need to learn when to keep your mouth shut, she'd say, always with that patronizing smile. Not every battle is worth fighting. I thought she was teaching me strategy. I didn't realize she was teaching me to be complicit. The first real crack appeared during the Morrison Pharmaceuticals pitch. They wanted us to market their new antidepressant to teenagers. The campaign brief was essentially asking us to glamorize mental health medication to kids who might not need it. When I raised concerns in our strategy meeting, Victoria cut me off. Sarah, we're marketers, not doctors. It's not our job to question the client's medical expertise. But it felt wrong, deeply wrong. So I did what I always did when something didn't sit right: I researched. I spent my weekend diving into FDA reports, medical journals, even reaching out to my college roommate who'd become a psychiatrist. The medication had a black box warning for increased suicide risk in patients under 25. The client wanted us to target 17-year-olds. Monday morning, I walked into Victoria's office with a folder full of documentation. "We can't do this campaign," I said, placing the research on her desk. "We'd be potentially endangering kids." Victoria didn't even open the folder. "Sarah, I appreciate your moral stance, but Pinnacle isn't in the business of turning down seven-figure accounts because of your personal feelings about pharmaceuticals. This isn't about feelings, this is about facts. Look at the data." "The data I'm looking at," she interrupted, "shows that Morrison Pharmaceuticals represents 18% of our annual revenue. Are you prepared to explain to our other employees why they're losing their jobs because you decided to play doctor?" I stared at her, realizing for the first time that the woman I'd admired, the woman I'd wanted to emulate, cared more about profit margins than human lives. I can't put my name on this, I said quietly. Then don't, Victoria replied, her voice ice cold. James can take lead on Morrison, you can assist. Assist? After 6 years of leading multi-million-dollar campaigns, I was being demoted to an assistant role because I wouldn't compromise my ethics. I should have walked away then, should have started updating my resume that afternoon, but I was stubborn. I believed in the company I'd helped build. I thought if I just worked harder, proved my value in other ways, things would return to normal. They didn't. Over the next 3 months, Victoria systematically froze me out. I was excluded from strategy meetings. My project budgets were slashed. Junior associates who used to seek my advice suddenly avoided me in the hallways. The Morrison campaign launched without my involvement and became a massive success for the agency and a nightmare for the families of 2 teenagers who committed suicide after starting the medication. The lawsuits never mentioned Pinnacle directly, but I knew. I carried that weight every single day. Meanwhile, Victoria was getting promoted to Chief Creative Officer, largely based on the success of campaigns I'd developed but could no longer claim. She was speaking at industry conferences, giving interviews about ethical marketing in the digital age. The hypocrisy was suffocating. But the final straw came during the annual performance review cycle. Sarah, Victoria said, reviewing my file with theatrical concern, your performance has been inconsistent this year. Your collaboration scores are particularly concerning. I'd received unanimously positive feedback from clients and junior staff. The only collaboration issues were with Victoria herself. I think we need to discuss whether Pinnacle is still the right fit for you, she continued. Maybe it's time to consider opportunities that better align with your particular sensibilities. I realized then that she wasn't just trying to sideline me. She was trying to push me out entirely. And she was doing it in a way that would make it impossible for me to find another comparable position in Chicago's tight-knit marketing community. So I started documenting everything. Every conversation, every email, every instance of credit theft and ethical compromise. I thought if I could build a solid case, maybe HR would listen. Maybe I could salvage my career and my principles. I had no idea how naive I was being. What would you do in this situation? Fight back or walk away? Tell us in the comments. The day it all came crashing down started like any other Tuesday. I arrived at the office at 7:30, grabbed my usual oat milk latte from the lobby cafe, and settled into my cubicle to review the quarterly campaign performance reports. Victoria had scheduled a team meeting for 9 to discuss strategic realignments, corporate speak that always made my stomach clench. By 8:45, the conference room was full. Victoria sat at the head of the table in her signature power pose, tablet and legal pad arranged precisely in front of her. The rest of the senior team filled the chairs around her like disciples at the Last Supper. Thank you all for being here, Victoria began, her voice carrying that practiced executive warmth that never quite reached her eyes. I've called this meeting to address some concerning information that's come to my attention. She pressed a button on her tablet, and the wall-mounted screen lit up with email screenshots. My stomach dropped as I recognized my own words staring back at me from the projection. My research, my documentation, my private communications with Dr. Amanda Foster, my psychiatrist friend, discussing the ethical implications of the Morrison campaign. It appears, Victoria continued, her voice now stripped of any warmth, that one of our senior staff members has been sharing confidential client information with outside parties. Specifically, discussing Pinnacle's marketing strategies and client data with individuals who have no business relationship with our agency. The room was dead silent. I could feel every pair of eyes turning toward me, but I couldn't look away from the screen. There were emails I'd sent to Amanda asking for professional insight into antidepressant marketing ethics, messages where I'd shared my concerns about targeting vulnerable populations, communications where I'd described feeling conflicted about certain campaigns. None of it was illegal. None of it compromised actual trade secrets, but Victoria had found a way to frame my ethical concerns as corporate espionage. Sarah, Victoria said, finally addressing me directly, would you care to explain why you've been discussing our client's confidential information with outside parties? I found my voice, though it came out smaller than I intended. Those emails were about ethical considerations, not trade secrets. Dr. Foster is a psychiatrist. I was seeking professional perspective on the psychological impact of our marketing approaches. Without authorization from the client or the agency, Victoria shot back. You shared details about Morrison Pharmaceuticals' target demographics, budget allocations, and strategic positioning with someone who has no confidentiality agreement with Pinnacle. I was trying to ensure we weren't causing harm. You were violating your employment contract. Victoria's words cut through the air like a blade. Section 12, subsection 4 clearly states that all client-related communications must be approved through proper channels. I knew that clause. It was designed to prevent actual corporate espionage, not ethical consultations. But sitting there, surrounded by colleagues who wouldn't meet my eyes, I realized the distinction didn't matter. Victoria had found her weapon, and she was wielding it with surgical precision. Furthermore, she continued, pulling up another screen, your recent performance issues, combined with this breach of confidentiality, leave me with no choice but to recommend immediate termination. The words hit me like a physical blow. Performance issues? My campaigns have exceeded targets for 18 consecutive months. Your inability to work within established team structures has been documented extensively, Victoria said, gesturing to what looked like a thick file of performance notes. Your resistance to collaborative decision-making, your tendency to undermine leadership decisions you personally disagree with. I stared at her, understanding flooding through me with sickening clarity. Every time I'd raised an ethical concern, every instance where I'd suggested alternative approaches, every moment where I'd tried to do the right thing, she'd been building a case against me. This is about Morrison, isn't it? I said, my voice stronger now. You're firing me because I wouldn't stay quiet about targeting teenagers with antidepressants. This is about your inability to maintain professional boundaries and confidentiality standards, Victoria replied smoothly. Two qualities that are non-negotiable in client services. James Whitmore, the creative director who'd become her loyal lapdog after Morrison, finally spoke up. Sarah, I think what Victoria is trying to say is that sometimes our personal values have to align with business realities. It doesn't make us bad people. I turned to look at him. This man who'd once told me I was the most talented strategist he'd ever worked with, who'd asked for my input on every major campaign for 3 years, and saw nothing but calculated distance in his eyes. Business realities, I repeated slowly. Is that what we're calling it when 2 teenagers die after starting medication we helped market to them? The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's face remained impassive, but I caught a flicker of something, annoyance, guilt, before her mask slipped back into place. This meeting is over, she said, closing her tablet with a sharp click. Sarah, please gather your personal belongings. Security will escort you out within the hour. Your final paycheck will include 2 weeks severance pay, contingent upon signing the non-disclosure agreement our legal team has prepared. As the room emptied around me, I sat frozen in my chair, staring at the conference table where I'd presented dozens of successful campaigns, where I'd fought for clients and celebrated wins and believed I was building something meaningful. The NDA they handed me an hour later wasn't just about confidentiality. It was about silence. It prohibited me from discussing my termination, the circumstances surrounding it, or anything related to Pinnacle's business practices for 5 years. It also included a non-compete clause that would prevent me from working at any marketing agency in the Chicago metropolitan area. Sign it, and I'd receive my severance pay and a neutral reference. Refuse, and they'd make sure every marketing director in the city knew I was a liability who couldn't be trusted with confidential information. I looked up at Victoria, who was standing by the window with her arms crossed, waiting for my decision. You know this is wrong, I said quietly. I know this is business, she replied without turning around, something you never quite learned to understand. I signed the papers, not because I agreed with them, but because I needed those 2 weeks of severance to figure out how to survive what came next. Walking out of Pinnacle's glass towers with my belongings in a cardboard box, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete professional annihilation. Victoria hadn't just fired me, she'd systematically destroyed my ability to continue in my chosen field. But as I stood on the sidewalk, watching the building that had been my second home for 6 years recede behind me, I made a promise to myself. I would find a way back. Not just to prove her wrong, but to prove that doing the right thing didn't have to mean sacrificing everything. I just had no idea how hard that promise would be to keep. Tell us in the comments, what's the worst way you've ever been betrayed at work? The first person I called was my dad. Sunshine, he said, using the nickname he'd given me when I was 7, and declared I was going to make the whole world happy with my ideas. What's wrong? You sound terrible. I was sitting in my car in Pinnacle's parking garage, still holding the cardboard box, still trying to process what had just happened. Dad, I got fired. Silence, then. What? How is that possible? You just got that promotion last year. I explained everything. The Morrison campaign, the ethical concerns, the documentation I'd gathered, the way Victoria had twisted my attempts to do the right thing into grounds for termination. Dad listened without interrupting, which was unlike him. Well, he said finally, you always were too good for that place anyway. Your mother and I raised you to have principles. Sometimes that costs you in the short term, but it pays off in the long run. Dad, I can't find another job in marketing for 5 years. The non-compete. Then don't work in marketing for someone else, he interrupted. Work in marketing for yourself. It was such a dad thing to say. Simple, optimistic, completely ignoring the fact that starting a business requires capital I didn't have, connections I'd just lost, and a confidence that felt thoroughly shattered. But as I drove home, his words echoed in my mind. Work for yourself. My best friend Maya was less optimistic when I called her that evening. Sarah, what were you thinking? She said, not even waiting for me to finish explaining before launching into damage control mode. You should have just kept your head down and done the campaign. It's not your job to save the world. I was sitting on my couch, still in my work clothes, eating ice cream straight from the container. Maya, we were marketing antidepressants to teenagers who might not need them. How was I supposed to stay quiet about that? By remembering that you have student loans and rent and a career to think about, she snapped. This isn't college anymore, Sarah. You can't just take moral stands and expect the world to applaud you for it. So I should have just stayed quiet, let them potentially harm kids because it was profitable. I'm saying you should have been smarter about how you handled it. You could have found a way to express concerns without getting yourself fired. You could have played the game. The phrase hit me like a slap. Playing the game. That's what everyone kept telling me I needed to learn how to do. But what if the game itself was corrupt? Maya, 2 teenagers died. And that's terrible, she said, her voice softening slightly. But it's not your fault, and destroying your own life isn't going to bring them back. After we hung up, I sat in the dark thinking about friendship and loyalty. Maya had been my closest friend since graduate school. We'd supported each other through breakups, family drama, career struggles. But now, when I needed her most, she was more concerned about my decision-making than the injustice of what had happened. The next morning, I called my former colleague Lisa Park. Lisa and I had started at Pinnacle the same week 6 years ago. We'd bonded over being the only 2 women under 30 in the senior ranks, sharing everything from client horror stories to dating disasters. Oh my God, Sarah, I heard what happened, Lisa said when she picked up. Are you okay? I've been better. Listen, I know this puts you in an awkward position, but I need to ask you something. Did you know about Victoria's plan to force me out? Long pause, too long. Sarah, look, I think maybe you should focus on moving forward instead of dwelling on what happened. That's not what I asked. Another pause. There were conversations about your fit with the company culture, but I never thought it would go this far. My heart sank. What kind of conversations? Victoria mentioned that you seemed resistant to feedback, that you were having trouble adapting to the collaborative environment she was trying to build. Lisa, you know that's not true. You've worked with me on dozens of campaigns. Have I ever been difficult to collaborate with? Well, no, but, Sarah, you did push back pretty hard on Morrison, and some people felt like you were questioning Victoria's leadership. Some people, as if it had been a consensus instead of Victoria's manipulation. What people, Lisa? I don't think it matters now. It matters to me. James, mostly, and Kevin from accounts. And, honestly, Sarah, some of the junior staff mentioned feeling like you were creating tension in meetings. Each name felt like another door slamming shut. These were people I'd mentored, collaborated with, considered friends, and they'd all apparently decided I was the problem. Did anyone defend me? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. I tried to, Lisa said quickly. I told Victoria that you were one of our best strategists and that losing you would be a mistake, but she said the decision had already been made. When? What? When did she say the decision had already been made? Because she fired me the day after I brought her the Morrison research. A silence. Lisa. I don't remember exactly when. Lisa, please just tell me the truth. I heard her take a deep breath. She mentioned letting you go about 2 weeks before the Morrison thing came up. She said you were becoming a liability. The betrayal hit me like a physical punch. Victoria had been planning to fire me for weeks, and the Morrison campaign had just been her excuse. Everything I'd believed about being terminated for ethical reasons was a lie. I'd been fired because I was inconvenient, and Victoria had simply waited for the right moment to make it look justified. Why didn't you warn me? I whispered. Sarah, I wanted to, but my promotion to senior director was being finalized. I couldn't risk getting involved in whatever was happening between you and Victoria. After I hung up, I sat on my kitchen floor and cried, not just from sadness, but from rage. The people I'd trusted, the colleagues I'd considered friends, had all chosen their own self-interest over basic decency. They'd watched Victoria orchestrate my professional destruction and done nothing. But the final test came from someone I hadn't expected. Marcus Rodriguez had been Pinnacle's IT director for 8 years. He was quiet, methodical, and completely uninterested in office politics. We'd worked together on digital campaigns, but had never been particularly close. I was surprised when he called me 3 days after my termination. Sarah, do you have a few minutes to talk? We met at a coffee shop in Wicker Park, far from Pinnacle's downtown location. Marcus looked nervous, constantly checking over his shoulder like he expected Victoria to materialize behind him. I need to show you something, he said, pulling out his laptop. But first, you need to promise me this conversation never happened. I nodded, though my heart was already racing. Marcus opened a folder on his desktop labeled Server Maintenance Logs. The files inside looked like gibberish to me, rows of timestamps and user data and system operations. I manage all of Pinnacle's digital infrastructure, Marcus explained quietly, including email servers, file access logs, and document version histories. He clicked on one of the files, and a spreadsheet opened showing detailed user activity logs. This shows every time someone accessed, modified, or shared documents related to your campaigns over the past year, he said. Look at this. He highlighted a series of entries showing Victoria accessing my Morrison research documents, not after I'd submitted them to her, but 3 weeks before I'd even started working on them. I don't understand, I said, staring at the timestamps. Victoria requested access to Morrison's preliminary briefing materials the day after they contacted us for a quote, Marcus explained. She reviewed all their research data, including the FDA warnings you later discovered on your own. The implications hit me slowly, then all at once. She knew about the suicide risks before she assigned me to the campaign. Gets worse, Marcus said, scrolling down to another section. Look at this. More highlighted entries showed Victoria systematically accessing and copying my campaign strategies, client presentations, and creative concepts. But the timestamps revealed she'd been doing it for months, not just for Morrison, but for every major campaign I'd worked on in the past year. She's been stealing your work, Marcus said simply, taking your ideas, repackaging them slightly, and presenting them as her own strategic insights. I stared at the screen, pieces clicking into place. Every time Victoria had refined my proposals, every brilliant, last minute insight she'd brought to client meetings, every time she'd seemed to anticipate exactly what clients wanted before I'd even finished my research. Marcus, this is systematic theft. It's worse than that, he said, opening another file. She's been building a case against you for months, look. The new document was a detailed dossier Victoria had compiled about me. It included screenshots of my concerning emails about Morrison, notes about my resistance to feedback, and what looked like a psychological profile analyzing my inability to adapt to corporate culture. But buried in the middle was something that made my blood run cold: a communication strategy document titled Managing the Sarah Chen Transition. I read it twice before the full scope of Victoria's betrayal became clear. She hadn't just stolen my work and fired me. She'd spent months planning my professional destruction, crafting a narrative that would make me unemployable while positioning herself as a thoughtful leader making difficult decisions. The document outlined exactly how she would frame my termination as a performance issue combined with confidentiality breaches. It included talking points for conversations with other agency directors in Chicago, ensuring they'd view me as a problematic hire who couldn't be trusted. Marcus, I said, my voice barely a whisper, how long have you known about this? He closed the laptop and looked directly at me for the first time since we'd sat down. I started noticing the unusual access patterns about 2 months ago, but I didn't understand what I was looking at until after you were fired. Why are you showing me this now? Because what she did to you was wrong, and because... He hesitated, then continued. Because she asked me to delete these logs yesterday. She said they were taking up unnecessary server space. I felt something cold settle in my chest. She wanted you to destroy the evidence. She wanted me to destroy proof of her own actions, Marcus corrected, which made me realize she knew exactly how damaging this information could be. I looked at this quiet man who'd risked his own job to show me the truth, and realized he was the only person at Pinnacle who'd chosen integrity over self-preservation. Marcus, can you make copies of these files? Already done, he said, sliding a USB drive across the table. Everything's on there, but Sarah, you need to be careful how you use this. Victoria is connected to people all over the city. If she finds out I gave you this information. She won't find out from me, I promised. But Marcus, why risk your job for this? He was quiet for a long moment. Because my daughter is 16, he said finally. And when I read about those Morrison campaign targets, I realized that could have been her. That could have been any of our kids. I spent that night reviewing every file Marcus had given me, seeing my professional destruction laid out in painful detail. Victoria hadn't just fired me, she'd orchestrated a campaign of character assassination that was more thorough and strategic than anything we'd ever done for our actual clients. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd documented everything, and in her arrogance, she'd assumed no one would ever challenge her version of events. Victoria Sterling had taught me that success in business required playing games, making compromises, and putting profit above principles. She was right about the games part. She just hadn't realized I'd been learning how to play them. Rate this betrayal on a scale of 1 to 10. Have you ever discovered someone was sabotaging you behind your back? Starting my own company with $3,000 in savings and a head full of righteous anger was probably the stupidest thing I'd ever done. It was also the best decision I ever made. The first 6 months were brutal. I worked from my kitchen table, lived on ramen and determination, and slowly built a client base of small businesses who couldn't afford agencies like Pinnacle but still needed strategic marketing. I specialized in ethical campaigns, helping sustainable brands tell authentic stories, working with nonprofits to amplify social causes, developing strategies that actually benefited the communities they targeted. It wasn't glamorous. My biggest client that first year was a local organic grocery chain with a marketing budget smaller than what Pinnacle spent on office coffee. But I was building something clean, something I could be proud of. And Marcus had been right about my work being good, really good. By month 8, word was starting to spread. The grocery chain's sales had increased 40% after my rebrand. A mental health nonprofit I'd worked with pro bono had tripled their volunteer signups. A sustainable fashion startup I'd helped launch had caught the attention of major investors. Small businesses started referring other small businesses. Those businesses grew and needed more sophisticated campaigns. Some of those campaigns won local advertising awards. Award recognition led to media coverage. Media coverage led to bigger clients. By the end of year 1, Chen Strategic. Yes, I named my company after myself out of pure spite, had 15 employees, and had turned down more potential clients than we could handle. By the end of year 2, we were competing for the same Fortune 500 accounts that Pinnacle used to consider their exclusive territory. But I hadn't forgotten about Victoria, or the promise I'd made to myself on that sidewalk. The opportunity came from an unexpected source, Morrison Pharmaceuticals. They'd been dropped by Pinnacle 6 months after my termination, when the lawsuits started piling up. Apparently, the families of those 2 teenagers had hired investigators who traced their children's medication decisions back to targeted social media campaigns. The legal liability had become too expensive for Pinnacle to manage, so they'd quietly ended the relationship and removed all Morrison content from their portfolio. Morrison's new CMO, Jennifer Walsh, reached out to Chen Strategic through a mutual connection. They needed a complete brand rehabilitation strategy. Their reputation was in shambles, their stock price had dropped 30%, and they were facing congressional hearings about pharmaceutical marketing practices. We need someone who understands ethical marketing, Jennifer explained during our initial call. Someone who can help us rebuild trust without compromising integrity. The irony was almost too perfect to be real. I accepted the account, but with conditions. Complete transparency about all product research. Independent medical review of all campaign materials. A commitment to targeting only appropriate demographics with appropriate messaging. And a budget allocation for mental health education, initiatives that would actually help the communities they'd harmed. Morrison agreed to everything. 6 months later, their reputation recovery campaign had become a case study in corporate responsibility. Their stock price had not only recovered, but reached an all-time high. Industry publications were calling it the gold standard for pharmaceutical marketing ethics. And that's when the phone call came. "Sarah, this is James Whitmore from Pinnacle. I hope you're doing well." I was in my new office, a converted warehouse in River North with exposed brick walls and windows that actually opened, reviewing quarterly revenue reports that showed Chen Strategic had just become the fastest-growing marketing agency in the Midwest. "Hello, James," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "This is unexpected." "Well, we've been following your success, of course. Very impressive what you've built." Thank you." "Actually, that's why I'm calling. Victoria asked me to reach out about a potential collaboration opportunity." I almost laughed. "A collaboration?" "We're aware that you've developed some innovative approaches to pharmaceutical marketing," James continued, clearly reading from notes. "Given Morrison's recent success with your strategies, Pinnacle would be interested in exploring a partnership arrangement." "Partnership," I repeated slowly. "What kind of partnership?" "Well, perhaps a merger of sorts. Chen Strategic has certainly made a name for itself, but imagine what you could accomplish with Pinnacle's resources and client base. Victoria thinks there could be significant synergies." I leaned back in my chair, watching the Chicago River flow past my windows. And what would my role be in this partnership? "Senior Vice President of Strategic Development," James said quickly. "You'd have your own team, significant autonomy, and of course a compensation package that reflects your contributions to the industry." "Let me guess," I said. "Victoria suggested this." "Actually, yes, she speaks very highly of your work, says she always knew you'd be successful." The audacity was breathtaking. The woman who'd systematically destroyed my career was now trying to buy her way back into my success. "James, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you remember why I was fired?" Uncomfortable pause. There were some confidentiality concerns, I believe, and performance issues. Performance issues, I repeated. My campaigns that outperformed projections 18 months in a row were performance issues. Sarah, I think we should focus on the future. The future where Victoria gets to claim credit for the ethical marketing approaches she fired me for developing. I don't think that's fair. You know what's not fair, James? Watching someone steal your work, destroy your reputation, and then try to buy you back when it becomes profitable. The line went quiet. So here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice steady and calm. You're going to tell Victoria that I decline her partnership offer, but you're also going to tell her that Chen Strategic is very interested in acquiring Pinnacle Digital Solutions. Acquiring what? We'll be making a formal offer next week. I suggest she pay attention to it. I hung up before James could respond. The truth was, I'd been planning this acquisition for months. Chen Strategic's rapid growth had attracted significant investment interest. We just closed a Series A funding round that gave us enough capital to make serious moves in the market. And Pinnacle, despite their reputation, was struggling. They'd lost 3 major clients after the Morrison controversy. Their creative talent had been poached by competitors offering better work environments. And their financial records, which were public due to their corporate structure, showed declining revenues and increasing overhead costs. Victoria had built her empire on stolen ideas and ethical compromises, but empires built on rotten foundations don't last forever. The formal offer came exactly 1 week later, delivered by our corporate attorney to Pinnacle's board of directors. It was generous, well above market value for a struggling agency, but it came with non-negotiable terms. Full acquisition, not partnership, complete restructuring of leadership and creative teams, and a commitment to ethical marketing standards that would be written into the company charter. Victoria called me directly that afternoon. Sarah, she said, her voice tight with barely controlled fury, I think there's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, I replied, just a business proposition. This is ridiculous. Chen Strategic is barely 2 years old. You can't seriously think you're in a position to acquire an established agency like Pinnacle. Victoria, I just acquired Morrison Pharmaceuticals as a client. The same Morrison you lost because of the lawsuit stemming from your campaign. The campaign you assigned to me knowing full well about the FDA warnings. Dead silence. That's right, I continued. I know you had access to all the safety data before you assigned me to the project. I know you set me up to take the fall if anything went wrong. And I know you've been stealing my strategic approaches for months. That's completely untrue. I don't know where you're getting this information, but Marcus Rodriguez is very good at his job, I said quietly. Better than you realized. Another silence, longer this time. What do you want? Victoria asked finally. I want you to accept our acquisition offer. Your shareholders will love the premium we're offering. Your employees will benefit from better leadership and ethical standards. And you'll get to experience what it's like to work for someone who values integrity over profit. This is insane. You can't just buy companies out of spite. You're right, I agreed. But I can buy struggling companies that would benefit from better management. Companies that have lost their way and need someone to help them remember what ethical business practices look like. Sarah, be reasonable. We can work something out. A real partnership where both agencies benefit. The time for partnerships was 2 years ago, I interrupted. Before you systematically destroyed my career, before you stole my work, before you chose profit over principles and then tried to make me the scapegoat for your choices. I never. Victoria, I have documentation of everything. Every stolen strategy. Every manufactured performance issue. Every step of your plan to force me out while positioning yourself for promotion. The question isn't whether you did it. The question is whether you want this information to become public during a hostile takeover or a friendly acquisition. The silence stretched so long I thought she might have hung up. The board meeting is tomorrow at 2, she said finally, her voice hollow. I assume you'll be presenting the offer personally. I wouldn't miss it. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror practicing what I would say. Not because I didn't know, I'd been rehearsing this moment in my head for 2 years, but because I wanted to make sure I got it exactly right. The next afternoon, I walked into Pinnacle's conference room wearing the same navy blue suit I'd worn to my first day of work 6 years earlier. It still fit perfectly, though everything else about me had changed. Victoria was already seated at the far end of the table, flanked by board members and legal counsel. She looked exactly the same, perfectly styled, impeccably dressed, completely in control. Except for her eyes. Her eyes looked like those of someone who just realized the ground beneath her feet was quicksand. "Good afternoon," I said, taking the seat directly across from her. "Thank you for agreeing to hear our proposal." I placed my tablet on the table and opened the presentation I'd spent weeks perfecting. Not just the acquisition terms and financial projections, but the complete story of what had led us to this moment. 2 years ago, I began, I was terminated from this company for what my supervisor called incompatibility with corporate culture. Today, I'm here to acquire this company and demonstrate what corporate culture should actually look like. I walked them through Chen Strategic's growth, our client success stories, our reputation for ethical marketing that had attracted top-tier talent from agencies across the city. I showed them our financial projections, our expansion plans, our vision for the future of responsible advertising. And then I showed them the server logs. This data, compiled by your own IT systems, documents a pattern of intellectual property theft that spans over 18 months, I said, watching Victoria's face go pale. It shows systematic appropriation of strategic concepts, campaign frameworks, and creative approaches developed by junior staff, but credited to senior management. One of the board members leaned forward. "Ms. Chen, are you alleging that Pinnacle management engaged in internal plagiarism?" "I'm not alleging anything," I replied. "I'm presenting documented evidence of exactly what happened." I clicked to the next slide, which showed a side-by-side comparison of my original Morrison research and Victoria's later presentation to the client. The strategies were identical, but my name had been replaced with hers throughout the document. This is the Morrison Pharmaceuticals campaign that ultimately resulted in multiple lawsuits and the loss of an $18 million account, I continued. The initial research identifying FDA warnings and target demographic concerns was completed by me and submitted to management 3 weeks before the campaign launched. Management chose to proceed despite these warnings, then terminated my employment when I raised ethical objections. Victoria finally found her voice. "This is a gross mischaracterization of events. Sarah was terminated for breaching confidentiality protocols, not for raising concerns." "According to this documentation," I said, clicking to Marcus's server logs, "you accessed my Morrison research files before I'd even completed them. You were aware of the FDA warnings before you assigned me to the campaign, which means you set me up to discover problems you already knew existed, then fired me when I did exactly what you expected me to do." The room was completely silent now. Every board member was staring at Victoria, who looked like she was calculating how much trouble she was in. "These allegations are serious," the board chair said slowly. "Victoria, do you have a response to this documentation?" The acquisition offer should be evaluated on its own merits," Victoria said, deflecting, "not on personal grievances from a former employee." "Personal grievances?" I repeated, standing up slowly. "Victoria, you didn't just fire me. You orchestrated a campaign to destroy my professional reputation. You stole my work. You lied to clients about my contributions. And then you tried to ensure I could never work in this industry again." I walked around the table toward her, my voice growing stronger with each step. "But here's what you didn't understand. You thought you were teaching me that principles don't matter in business. That integrity is a luxury successful people can't afford. That playing by the rules means letting other people set the rules." I stopped directly beside her chair. "What you actually taught me is that the only way to change a corrupt system is to build a better one." I returned to my seat and closed my tablet. "The acquisition offer stands as presented. You have 48 hours to respond. If the board accepts, current management will be restructured, and Pinnacle will operate under Chen Strategic's ethical guidelines going forward. If the board declines, This documentation will be forwarded to the Better Business Bureau, the American Marketing Association's Ethics Committee, and every major industry publication in Chicago. Victoria's lawyer leaned over to whisper something in her ear, but she shook her head. "Sarah," she said, her voice different now, smaller, more human than I'd heard it in years. Can we talk privately?" "I don't think there's anything left to discuss privately," I replied. "But if you'd like to address the board's questions about these documents, I'm happy to stay and provide additional context." She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is extortion." "No," I said calmly. "This is accountability. Something you taught me has been missing from this industry for far too long." The board voted unanimously to accept Chen Strategic's acquisition offer. Not because they were impressed by my presentation, though they were. Not because they were horrified by Victoria's documented theft, though they were that too. They voted to accept because our offer included a liability protection clause that would shield them from potential lawsuits related to the Morrison campaign and any other questionable practices that might surface. Victoria's empire, built on stolen ideas and ethical compromises, crumbled in exactly 47 minutes of board deliberation. The integration process took 3 months. 3 months of walking through Pinnacle's offices as the owner instead of the employee who'd been escorted out by security. 3 months of reviewing every account, every campaign, every strategy to determine what aligned with Chen Strategic's values and what needed to be completely restructured. Some discoveries were exactly what I'd expected. Morrison wasn't the only ethically questionable account Pinnacle had pursued under Victoria's leadership. A predatory loan company targeting college students, a weight loss supplement with dangerous side effects, a social media campaign designed to sell expensive cosmetics to teenagers with body image issues. Other discoveries surprised me, like the fact that Victoria had been falsifying client satisfaction reports for over a year, inflating success metrics to justify charging higher fees, or that she'd been systematically underpaying female employees while giving substantial raises to male colleagues for identical work, or that 3 of Pinnacle's biggest wins under her leadership had actually been developed by junior staff members who'd never received credit. But the most surprising discovery was personal. I found it in Victoria's executive files while reviewing leadership transition documents. A folder labeled Personnel Development that contained detailed psychological profiles of every senior staff member, including strategies for managing their weaknesses and pressure points. My file was 30 pages long. Victoria had analyzed everything about me. My Midwestern work ethic that made me susceptible to guilt trips about letting the team down. My perfectionist tendencies that could be exploited through impossible deadlines. My strong ethical compass that could be turned into a weapon against me if she created the right scenarios. She'd studied me like a lab specimen, identifying exactly which buttons to push to make me either comply with her demands or self-destruct trying to resist them. But she'd made one crucial miscalculation. She'd assumed that breaking me down would eliminate me as a threat. She hadn't considered that it might just forge me into something stronger. The personnel restructuring was surgical and swift. Victoria was offered 2 choices: resign with a generous severance package and a neutral reference, or be terminated for cause with full documentation of her misconduct forwarded to industry oversight bodies. She chose resignation. James Whitmore was offered the opportunity to stay as creative director under new management with a significantly reduced salary that reflected his actual contributions rather than his political alliances. He chose to seek opportunities elsewhere. Lisa Park was offered a lateral transfer to our Portland office, where she could continue her career without the constant reminder of her choices during my termination. She accepted gratefully. Most of the junior staff stayed. Many of them thanked me privately for creating an environment where they felt safe to express concerns without fear of retaliation. Several admitted they'd wanted to support me 2 years ago, but were too afraid of Victoria's vindictive management style. Marcus Rodriguez was promoted to Chief Technology Officer and given a substantial raise. When I told him about the promotion, he just smiled and said, Sometimes doing the right thing takes a while to pay off, but it always pays off eventually. The client transitions were handled carefully. Some accounts, like the predatory loan company, we declined to renew. Others required complete strategic overhauls to align with our ethical standards. A few clients initially pushed back, but most were relieved to work with an agency that prioritized long-term reputation over short-term gains. Morrison Pharmaceuticals became our flagship account, not because of the revenue they generated, but because of what our work with them represented. We'd taken a company that had caused genuine harm and helped them become a model for responsible pharmaceutical marketing. Their new campaigns focused on education rather than persuasion, targeting healthcare providers rather than vulnerable populations, and included resources for patients to make informed decisions with their doctors. The real satisfaction, though, came from smaller moments. Like when Dr. Amanda Foster, my psychiatrist friend whose consultation had been twisted into evidence of my confidentiality breach, called to tell me that Morrison's new mental health education initiative had been cited by the American Psychiatric Association as a best practice example. Like when the mother of one of the teenagers who died after the original Morrison campaign sent me a handwritten letter thanking Chen Strategic for helping ensure other families won't go through what we did. Like when a young marketing coordinator named Jessica, fresh out of college, told me during her first week that she'd chosen to work for Chen Strategic specifically because she wanted to learn how to build a career without compromising her values. But perhaps the most poetic justice came 6 months after the acquisition, when Victoria applied for a senior position at Chen Strategic. She'd apparently burned through her severance money faster than expected and was struggling to find work in Chicago's marketing community. Word had spread about the circumstances of her resignation, and other agencies were hesitant to hire someone with her reputation for ethical flexibility. Her application landed on my desk on a Tuesday morning with a cover letter that was a masterclass in professional desperation disguised as confidence. "Dear Sarah," it began, "I hope this letter finds you well and thriving in your new role. I've been following Chen Strategic's remarkable success and am impressed by the innovative approaches you've implemented." She went on to praise the visionary leadership I demonstrated and express interest in contributing to the ethical marketing revolution Chen Strategic was leading in the industry. The woman who'd fired me for being too honest was now asking me to hire her based on her commitment to honesty. I didn't respond to the application directly. Instead, I had our HR director send a standard rejection letter citing cultural fit concerns and alignment issues with company values. The same language Victoria had used to destroy my career was now being used to close the door on hers. But I wasn't finished yet. The strangest part about revenge, I discovered, is how empty it feels when you finally get it. I'm sitting in what used to be Victoria's office, now my office, looking out at the same Chicago skyline she used to survey like a queen reviewing her kingdom. Her nameplate has been replaced with mine. Her awards have been packed away. Even her custom-made desk has been donated to a nonprofit that helps women start small businesses. Everything that was hers is now mine, and somehow that feels less satisfying than I thought it would. Don't get me wrong, justice feels good. Knowing that Victoria can't hurt other young professionals the way she hurt me brings me genuine peace. Seeing former Pinnacle employees thrive in an environment where their ideas are credited and their ethics are valued fills me with pride. But the victory I thought I wanted, the moment of triumph where Victoria would be forced to acknowledge my superiority, never really came. When she cleaned out her office that final day, she didn't apologize or admit wrongdoing or show any sign that she understood the damage she'd caused. She just looked tired. "Good luck, Sarah," she said, handing me her key card. "You're going to need it." There was no dramatic breakdown, no tearful admission of guilt, no satisfying moment where she begged for forgiveness or acknowledged that I'd been right all along. Just a middle-aged woman who'd built her identity around power and control, now facing the reality that both were gone. I realized then that people like Victoria don't learn lessons from consequences. They just find new ways to blame others for their failures. The real transformation happened in the people around her. James Whitmore sent me a LinkedIn message 6 months after leaving Pinnacle. He'd taken a position at a smaller agency in Milwaukee, where he was doing some of the most creative work of his career. I didn't realize how toxic that environment had become until I left, he wrote. Thank you for showing us there was another way. Lisa Park thrived in our Portland office, eventually becoming their director of strategy. She called me on the 1-year anniversary of the acquisition to thank me for the opportunity to rebuild her career in a place where she felt safe being authentic. Even Marcus, who'd already been one of the good ones, seemed lighter, more willing to speak up in meetings, more confident in sharing ideas. He told me that working in an environment without fear had reminded him why he'd chosen his career in the first place. The ripple effects extended beyond Pinnacle. Other agencies in Chicago started implementing transparency policies for idea attribution. Industry publications began featuring more articles about ethical marketing practices. A code of conduct I'd helped develop for Chen Strategic became a template that several other firms adopted voluntarily. Change, I realized, happens not through destroying the people who resist it, but through creating systems so compelling that resistance becomes irrelevant. Morrison Pharmaceuticals became the example everyone pointed to when discussing responsible pharmaceutical marketing. Their stock price stabilized. Their reputation recovered. More importantly, their new campaigns included resources that actually helped people make informed healthcare decisions with their doctors instead of manipulating them into requesting specific medications. Dr. Foster told me that several of her colleagues had started recommending Morrison's educational materials to patients because they provided clear, unbiased information about treatment options. The company that had once profited from exploiting vulnerable teenagers was now actively working to protect them. You did this, Amanda said during one of our monthly coffee dates. You turned a company that was causing harm into one that's actually helping people. We did this, I corrected. Victoria fired me for consulting with you about ethics. She thought your professional insight was a threat to their business model. Turns out she was right. Amanda laughed. Sometimes being right takes longer than we'd like. 6 months ago, I received an unexpected email from Victoria. She'd moved to Phoenix and was working as a freelance marketing consultant for small businesses. The tone was different from any communication I'd ever received from her, humble, reflective, almost apologetic. Sarah, she wrote, I've been thinking a lot about our time working together and the choices I made. I won't insult you by claiming I didn't know what I was doing or that I had good intentions. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I convinced myself it was necessary for business success. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that watching what you've built has forced me to reconsider everything I thought I knew about leadership and success. Your approach is better. You were right, and I was wrong. I hope that knowledge brings you some satisfaction. I stared at that email for a long time before deleting it without responding. Not because I was still angry, the anger had faded long ago, replaced by something more powerful, purpose, but because some apologies come too late to matter, and some bridges are better left burned. The truth is, Victoria did me a favor when she fired me. She forced me to discover that I didn't need her approval, or her systems, or her version of success. She taught me that sometimes the only way to win a rigged game is to stop playing and start your own. Chen Strategic now employs 47 people across 3 offices. We've been named Agency of the Year by the Chicago Business Journal for 2 consecutive years. Our ethical marketing certification program has been adopted by universities and professional organizations nationwide. But the metric I'm most proud of isn't revenue or awards or recognition. It's the number of young professionals who have told me that working here has restored their faith in the possibility of building a career without compromising their values. Yesterday, a 24-year-old strategist named David approached me after a team meeting. He'd just graduated from DePaul and was working on his first major campaign for a sustainable energy startup. Sarah, he said, I have some concerns about the messaging strategy the client requested. It's not technically false, but it's misleading about their environmental impact. I smiled, remembering myself at his age, struggling with similar concerns and finding no one who would listen. Tell me more, I said. Because that's the thing about building something better. It's not about getting revenge on the people who wronged you. It's about making sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else. Victoria taught me that honest people don't survive in corrupt systems. I taught myself that honest people can build better systems. And sometimes, if you're patient enough and principled enough and stubborn enough, you can watch those better systems replace the corrupt ones entirely. Final question. Rate this story 0 10 and tell us, what's the best revenge you've ever gotten? Was it worth the wait?